Good morning, good afternoon, everyone, from wherever you are attending this webinar. Welcome. Today, we have the pleasure of having three great experts in the field of mental health to hear about the crucial collaborations between physical and behavioral sciences in addressing climate change and mental health. We have Dr. Denise Stoley, who is the Senior Director of Applied Psychology at the American Psychological Association, where he oversees applied psychology initiatives across a variety of subject areas, including climate change. He is also a licensed attorney. He received his PhD in social and personality psychology and his law degree from the University of Nebraska. Dr. Stoley is also a member of the AGU GeoHealth Steering Committee and the EcoAmerica Climate for Health Leadership Climate Executive Committee. We also have Dr. Elise Amel. She has a PhD in industrial organizational psychology from Purdue University. She has been teaching at the University of St. Thomas for over 2 decades. She's an award-winning professor of psychology, chair of the Department of Earth, Environment, and Society, past president for the Society of Environmental, Population, and Conservation Psychology, and she is also a fellow of the American Psychological Association. And our last speaker is Dr. Christy Manning. She's a cognitive psychologist. She has been teaching in the Environmental Studies Department at Macalester College since 2008. Her research focuses on what motivates community-level action in response to the climate crisis and how climate injustice impacts people's well-being. Dr. Manning is also a fellow of the American Psychological Association and the Society for Environmental, Population, and Conservation Psychology. Before I hand the floor to our speakers, we will hear about some updates and news and activities from GeoHealth section. We have Dr. Susan Annenberg here with us. She's the president of the AGU GeoHealth section, and she will update us on the recent GeoHealth activities and upcoming events. Some quick reminders before I hand it to Dr. Annenberg. Please make sure you have your microphone and camera off during presentation. This webinar is recorded, and the recording will be posted on the GeoHealth YouTube channel. I also encourage you to use the chat feature to ask your questions. With that, Dr. Annenberg, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Azar. Hello, everyone. My name is Susan Annenberg. I'm the chair of the Environmental and Occupational Health Department at George Washington University, and also have the pleasure of being the president of the GeoHealth section of the American Geophysical Union this year and next year. I'm really looking forward to today's seminar. I'm going to keep this really short so we can get to our content today, but I just want to mention a few things. We love people getting involved in our section. So if you might be interested in getting involved in planning meetings, early career events, diversity inclusion efforts, geoscience and health policy, communications, considering awards for this section, please email me. And as soon as I finish talking, I will put my email address in the chat. I'm easy to find as well, though. And we'll get you to the right place to make sure that you're linked up with that committee. I also wanted to mention, for those of you who plan to attend our annual meeting, the American Geophysical Union annual meeting is going to be in San Francisco in December. When you register for that meeting, please register for the GeoHealth reception. It will be complimentary, and registering is not required, but it is very much encouraged. So that's going to be open to everybody. It'll be Tuesday night of the annual meeting of the American Geophysical Union. And we have a newsletter that will be coming out on Monday, hopefully, to everyone who has signed up to receive emails through the AGU Connect system. So if you are not receiving those emails from the GeoHealth section through AGU Connect, it is actually an opt-in thing. So you have to go into your AGU account and check the box that you do want to receive emails from GeoHealth. So please do that. And we have a newsletter that shares a lot of the information about events coming out in our section very soon. So thanks, everyone. I'm going to stop talking now so we can get to our content for today. And I'm very much looking forward to it. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Annenberg. Once again, thank you for joining us today. And now, without further ado, Dr. Stoley, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Azar. Happy to be here today. And as Azar mentioned, I am with the American Psychological Association. And as many of you may know, psychology as a field and the American Psychological Association is, as an organization, includes psychologists who do mental health therapy with individuals and also psychologists who do research and application with groups at sort of more of a systemic level and focusing on human behavior and human performance beyond the issues of mental health. And climate change is of great relevance to both of those groups. And climate change, of course, is necessarily an interdisciplinary topic and problem. And psychologists are hungry for the information that's being generated by other fields that's relevant to this topic. Psychologists, frankly, are not equipped to generate original science on which energies or technologies or practices may have the largest physical impact on the climate and the environment. We have to rely on other sciences to generate accurate information about those questions. But once we have that information in hand, what we can do is then look at how you influence or nudge human behavior in those areas that are likely to have the greatest impact. And psychology, of course, is also eager to share the information being generated within our field with scientists from other disciplines and also with policymakers. And as a field, whether we're talking about clinical psychologists who are doing therapy or applied psychologists who are doing behavioral science, one thing that unifies all psychologists is that we want individuals to be free from mental illness or unnecessary psychological suffering. We also want individuals to be acting in concert to make behavioral choices that are sustainable and that benefit society. And interestingly, then, when you take that to climate change, it presents a complicated issue for psychology. And here's why. There is evidence that there's an increasing level of climate-related anxiety, or maybe it's climate-related worry. And distinguishing those two concepts can be important. And generally, as psychologists, we don't want people to have mental illness or to have clinical levels of anxiety. But there's a question, and the question is some level of climate-related anxiety actually adaptive as opposed to maladaptive? And there's some evidence that is coming out in journals like the Journal of Environmental Psychology in very recent years that suggests that more climate worry or anxiety may actually lead to more environmentally positive behaviors. And of course, we want people to be engaging in environmentally positive behaviors. But then there's also a question of, are those environmentally positive behaviors coming from anxiety, or are they coming from worry? And are they leading to truly impactful behaviors that really make a difference in the world, or maybe not so much? And is there a point at which where too much anxiety is just going to lead to procrastination and inaction, and so having the opposite effect that we want to have? So we've got all of these questions swirling around, and then, as if that wasn't complicated enough, when we start looking at large-scale behavior change, it gets really complicated to think about, how do you motivate people to take action with regard to problems that might seem distant to them in both time and space? And importantly, how do we motivate people not just to take action, but to take action in the ways that are going to have the most impact? And that may not always be the most visible or frequent behaviors. And so how do you get that messaging out to people? These are very complex problems, but the good news is that there are a lot of people, a lot of psychologists who are grappling with these questions, and there's a lot of new science that is emerging on these questions. And so I'm delighted to be joined here today with Dr. Manning and Dr. Amel, who are both dedicating a substantial portion of their professional careers to looking at exactly these questions, and are going to be able to give us a lot more insight into what's being done and what some of the possible solutions are. And so what I'd like to do is just turn it over to Christy and Elise for you to take it from here.
Thank you so much, Dennis. Really appreciate it. And thanks to the AGU for having us here today. So I'm going to begin by by just providing a few references that you can go to. If you want a short summary of the types of things we're talking about today, we've got an article in the 2017 Science magazine that we can give you more information about. And as well, if you are interested in more detail about what we're talking about today, there is a textbook that we've co-authored called Psychology for Sustainability. It's in the 5th edition, and it's really a great reference for learning more about what we're going to be talking about today. I'd like to actually just lay the groundwork briefly for like the underlying assumptions that drive our talk today, and that is that environmental problems are really human behavior problems. We haven't been playing nicely with our ecosystem, and that is the source of climate change and other environmental problems that are around. So we also believe that humans and the environment have a reciprocal relationship, that not only does our behavior impact the planet, but the state of the planet impacts us as well. So that's what Christy is going to start us off with. And then finally, we have a lot of different tools in psychology that can spur action, and we'll talk about how, private sphere action, the things we do in our own little world matter and are important. But what's even more important is if we aim our individual behavior at these bigger systems that really drive the lion's share of the behavior that's been disrupting the climate. So because our title starts with From Anxiety to Action, Christy is going to start us off by summarizing what we know about climate and mental health. So I'm going to stop sharing.
And I'm going to start sharing. And even though I spent more than a year teaching on Zoom, I still have to narrate each move I make as I do this. So here we go. Does everybody see my slide? Yay.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, we can see that.
So as Elise just mentioned, the starting point for part 1 is this reciprocal relationship we share, human beings, human society shares with our planet. And human activity has had and continues to have measurable impact on our planet. And in turn, the changes that we're wreaking are impacting us. What I'm going to talk about now are the mental health impacts of our changing climate. Much of this, all of it, in fact, comes from this report, which you can download from the Eco America website. So we think of and summarize in this report the mental health impacts of climate change as coming from 3 broad categories. And the first one is the trauma we experience when we live through a sudden onset event, such as has been happening in New York and Vermont just this week. This is a picture from Montpelier, Vermont. The number and severity of sudden onset disasters around the world has been climbing. And when areas are hit by a hurricane, flooding, wildfire, there's hardly a region of the world left unaffected. And when areas are hit, human beings experience trauma and a lot of distress during the event, especially if they feel their lives in danger, or if they feel they experience certain types of loss of property, loss of pet, loss of a loved one. And the trauma and distress they experience is like a dose response. The more extreme, the more trauma, the larger number of events. That if you experience 2,000-year floods in the space of 5 years, you're going to have more traumatic impact than if you only experience one, especially if you haven't had a lot of time to recover in the meantime. These sudden onset events leave people with a lot of financial, familial, and personal impacts to deal with. And this can leave people with PTSD. The broad psychological literature dating back many years, the numbers span from about 7% of people experiencing PTSD in the aftermath of an extreme event to up to 47%. It really depends on the circumstances of the people, of the community, and of the event, but many people experience PTSD in an extreme event. And then there's also a long tail afterward of a certain number of people who continue to experience anxiety, depression, substance abuse. And then it's also important to remember that experiencing an extreme event can have impacts on the entire community. If people are displaced, they are sent all over the place. Children miss school, everybody misses out on their normal social interactions, and that has serious psychological implications for well-being. If you can't rely on the community connections that you usually rely on for your well-being, you will feel the trauma even more. The second broad category of mental health impacts come from the slower chronic changes, increasing heat, drought and desertification, and poor air quality and higher levels of pollution as climate change advances. So people are often not aware that these chronic changes are also dangerous to mental health. And just as an example, heat is not only deadly in extreme heat waves, but it is also a physiological and psychological stressor. So when people experience higher temperatures, we feel more irritable, we feel more stressed, and people during heat waves, there are an increase in emergency room visits because of mental health. So that's one connection to mental health because of heat. Another connection between heat and drought and desertification is on communities like farming communities, like indigenous communities, who have a close connection, whose livelihoods and identities are connected to the land. There has been an increase, a spike in farmer suicide around the world because of drought and heat. That's another significant mental health impact. And then as a societal impact, when temperatures go up, aggression, interpersonal aggression and intergroup aggression increases. And that leads to a whole array of other mental health and trauma impacts. If you want to know more, there's so much more information in the report I referenced earlier. The third general category is what we are calling climate anxiety, but it also goes by eco-anxiety, soul nostalgia, climate grief. There are many names for this concept of worry about the future. An APA study in 2020 found that about 2/3 of respondents felt that they're experiencing at least a little bit of this anxiety. About 1/4 of people in 2020 said they're feeling a lot. A replication of that study today, after the many climate impacts we felt this summer, would probably be much higher. The level of climate anxiety tends to be higher among young people. It's important to note that this does not mean it is a clinical problem. It is a normal response, expected response to the data. It is also critical to note that all of the mental health burdens of climate change, they are not equally distributed, that certain populations around the world and in the United States are feeling the brunt first and worst. In the United States, it tends to be communities of color, as an example, communities that historically and even in the present day experienced redlining and restrictive racial covenants to where they could live, tend to be located in areas where there's more concrete and less tree cover, thus making them vulnerable to the urban heat island. Higher heat leads to higher mental health impacts, higher danger. So, and around the world, the countries in the global north, the wealthier people and wealthier countries have contributed more to the problem, and it is the poorer countries tending to be in the global south that are experiencing the impacts more brutally. So there is a strong environmental justice dimension to the mental health impacts of climate change. So I'm going to switch gears now and talk about the psychological research on what spurs action, what makes people take action. And there's so much research out there on this. It's hard to summarize it, and I'm keeping track, and I've got about 6 minutes left here to tell you about this. So Elise and I thought that one really nice framework to help us summarize the vast psychological literature, it is one that was developed by two Oberlin psychologists, Cindy France and Stephen Meyer, in 2009. And they based their framework on another framework from the 1970s from Latané and Darley that was used to explain the bystander effect. The bystander effect is this phenomenon where people walk by somebody lying on the street who seems to be in need of help, but people walk by and look the other way and don't reach over and help that person. And Meyer and France and Meyer reasoned that we're experiencing collective bystander effect when it comes to the climate. Why? So they adopted this framework that has 5 stages, and at any one stage, there is a psychological reason why people won't help. The first stage is you have to notice that the climate is changing, and climate is yelling at us now. It is hard to not notice that something is happening. But as I already mentioned, the sad perverted irony is that the people who are causing the problem also statistically are less likely to be experiencing its impacts most directly. So the climate signal has been lost in daily weather and also seasonal changes. That again, it is, we're not seeing that so much anymore. The data are showing that Americans, especially who have lagged in their climate awareness and climate concern, are starting to wake up to the problem. So first you have to notice that that climate change exists. And then you might notice it, but we hear from certain areas of our American society, and I'll name it, that it tends to be people who identify as really extreme conservatives, that climate change is due to natural processes rather than something that we need to worry about. So this gets in the way of us interpreting the climate change as an emergency. We are social creatures, and we don't just directly respond to the information out there in the world. We look around at what other people are doing and how other people are responding to a crisis. That's why in the bystander effect, if you are in a bigger crowd and more people are walking by somebody lying down, you're more likely to walk by because you're taking signals from others. So we are taking signals from important others. And especially among very extreme Republicans, there is a community decision that climate change is not real. And so many people who are aware of climate change are interpreting it through the lens of what the important people in that community are saying. But that doesn't leave non-conservatives, non-extreme Republicans off the hook. It is everybody who is not responding like it is a crisis. We're all carrying our worry, but not acting like we're worried. And so that gets in the way. But even if we get through this bottleneck, we then also have to feel a sense of personal, moral responsibility to take action. Whose fault is this? And climate change is a global Earth systems phenomena, but it is also a global social systems, political and economic systems phenomena. What's my role in this? This gets into one thing that Dennis mentioned earlier, the psychological distance of climate change. If I am an American citizen, I live in Minnesota, up until a couple of years ago, climate change wasn't really that obvious. So it still felt psychological distance to the average person in the northern latitudes. That's changing, but it still feels psychologically distant in terms of my contributions to it. I recycle, I compost, I don't drive very much. How can it be my fault? And also, how can my actions actually make a difference? So there's a sense that I have to actually be able to identify my role and how it impacts me for me to start to feel a sense of responsibility to take action. And then I do feel a sense of responsibility to take action. The next possible place where this can break down is I have no idea what to do. I can do lots of individual sphere actions, but does that really make a difference? Most of us recognize that the individual sphere actions are a drop in the bucket, still important, but what else can I do? Where else can I turn? And this, there's my signal. I'll just be one more minute. Having a sense of what to do and knowing how to do it and knowing that I can do it gracefully and be effective in doing it makes a big difference to moving us to the next stage. And efficacy is a really important psychological construct in there. We need to feel that, like, I personally can take action, self-efficacy, and that action will have the intended outcome efficacy, in order for us to feel motivated to take action. Finally, we have to decide to act. And deciding to act has also many, many variables. Some of the important variables in deciding to act include the situation that we find ourselves in. So yes, I want to take action, I want to do something, but is it possible for me to do something? So for example, solar panels are not affordable for everybody. That's an individual sphere action anyway. Or maybe I live in a rural community and it's impossible for me to get my electricity any other way than through a traditional coal burning power source, and there are no activists around me. There may be barriers, real world barriers to taking action. So it's important to remember that we can decide to act, but the world may get in the way of us taking action. Behavior is always a product of the person and the situation they find themselves in. So I am here's the model once again. I am now going to turn it back to my friend and colleague, Elise Amel, who is going to talk about her work looking at how we can amplify the impact we have by working on changing organizations. And over to you, Elise. I will stop sharing. There we go.
And here I go. Oh, let me see, starting my video. Okay, thank you, Christy. I just wanted to express in a little bit more detail what we've already alluded to, and that is that humans, individuals, can do quite a bit to change their behavior. But there are a lot of things that get in the way. But there's another aspect of our behavior that is a bit problematic right now, and that is we tend to aim our efforts at things we perceive we have control over. And that's largely our private sphere, which is just the circle just outside of the person. So this is our family that or our friends that we live with. This is the doing things like recycling and composting, or riding a bike instead of driving. So these are choices that we make that that have to do with our own behavior. And that's valuable, but it, like the scope and the pace of individual change is far too small and slow for being able to deal with climate change. And so we have to actually go outside of the private sphere to our social networks, our organizations, our governance structures, and our larger culture in order to get many, many more people moving in the direction that can help us better address climate change. And so our impact increases the farther outside of our private sphere we go. Today, I'm just going to mention a few things about the organizational sphere that you might be able to walk away with today, and examine in your own situations. So there are all sorts of levers within organizations that can help drive human behavior in a different direction. And I'm just going to talk about two. One is the idea of organizational culture, and the other is transformational leadership. So organizational culture, I'll give you a second to look at this definition. It involves the basic underlying assumptions that we share in a group. And it is these assumptions that drive the expected behavior. And it's taught to new members as the correct way to think and believe and feel in relation to the activities we're involved in together. So why is organizational culture important? Because it provides the cues that help us work together and interpret our situation and navigate. So back to what Christy was saying in terms of, we have to interpret the situation as an emergency, and we have to interpret it as something that we have a hand in. Also, there is a lot of discomfort involved with being asked to do things that violate these shared assumptions that we have. So if our assumptions have been unfettered growth, and we have plenty of resources, and then now we're being asked to do something different, like conserve resources, or find a different model than growth, that feels super uncomfortable for us. So given that our cultures have driven our current behavior, which is unsustainable, these cultures actually have to change. And there's yet another important feature to having a culture that represents where we want to go. And that is that people are more likely to stick with an organization if they feel like their own values and beliefs are aligned with their organization's values and beliefs. So we can turn this on its head and have culture be a source for our collective sustainability. So you notice in the definition of culture that it's a set of assumptions. And if you look at this diagram, you can see that our sort of modern industrial worldview, which is that there are plenty of resources and we can just take what we want from our planetary resources, make what we want, and then throw it away, and that technology is going to be the source of all of our getting out of this mess, and the importance of efficiency. These are all the way Western culture has been thinking for the last couple hundred years. which as geoscientists, you know, is just a very small part of planetary history. This modern industrial worldview denies some of the fundamental boundaries of our planet. And so we actually have to be moving toward a set of assumptions that's more like what you see on the right side of this diagram, which is like there are limits to our ability to regenerate different resources, and that circular systems are the systems that have survived millennia, and that, you know, creating waste is a weird thing when you think about how ecosystems work, so that we need to actually make sure that waste from one process becomes food for another, and generating circular systems. And that even small manipulations somewhere in a system can lead to system-wide consequences, often unintentional and unexpected. And that there's value in diversity in terms of retaining the integrity of a system when we hit speed bumps. So when the assumptions of an organization have to change, the culture has to change as well, which is actually a bit challenging, but we know some things that can help. Now, if you take the AGU as an organization, you already have a set of stated values that you use as guiding principles for your group. And in your case, your mission statement actually explicitly expresses the value you have for benefiting not only humanity, but also the environment. So you're in really good shape here as a group, but you might think about the other groups you're involved in, like, for instance, if you're in higher education, or if you're in a business or in a nonprofit that doesn't necessarily have stated values that include you know, dealing with climate change, then you actually have to figure out a way to generate some new shared principles and make sure that they are publicly articulated. So organizational culture is a concept that has a variety of different features to it, from the abstract values that I just mentioned all the way down to very concrete symbols. So I'll just talk briefly about each one of those. So the values that we share drive the expected behavior people display. So if everybody is out for themselves and you're expected to do the most efficient thing, those norms are going to be antithetical to being able to work together to resolve climate change. The stories we talk about our organizations really express these shared values that we have. So if you have a good story about how you've, as a group, started to do things differently, or moments of pride, of success that you've had managing climate change, then those stories can reinforce a culture moving forward that continues to work on climate change. And then the symbols that we have all around us include, like, the artwork and the types of awards we display, and the types of purchasing we do. All of these things that we have represent whether we're climate friendly or not. And so one thing about organizational culture is that the values, norms, stories, and symbols all have to be aligned with each other. So if you've got a value that you care about the environment, but your stories tell you something different, your norms show something different, all the things around you show something different, people are going to be super confused and become really unsettled psychologically about that. We have a real problem with inconsistency. So one thing you might do if you feel like your organization isn't stepping up is to examine the values, make sure they're consistent with climate action, make sure that the norms or the expected behaviors of each individual in the organization are also aligned with that mission. The stories that you're telling about your organization are consistent with addressing climate change, and the symbols express that you are walking the talk. Then people are going to be committed to your organization. They're actually going to be able to move a lot of people to act in climate-friendly ways. The second thing I wanted to talk about is transformational leadership. And, you know, when people think of leaders, they often think of a person at the top of a hierarchy, and that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about any person who believes that transformation needs to have, and the kinds of things that help them get others on board for such a transformation. And there are 4 basic features of that make any individual transformative in their leadership. And one is building trust with, there are 2 kinds of the power that we talk about that can help build trust, and one is expert power and one is referent power. So expert power is like having a degree in something. So as a geoscientist, you have typically an advanced degree of some kind you know, and you have certification that expresses to people that you are an expert in a field, and that in most cases has a lot of value. That hand in hand with what we call referent power, which is the desire to be like you, or a sense of admiration for you. Together, being an expert and being somebody admired is about the most powerful combination of like personal power you can bring to a situation. So basically, your degrees and your experience plus your humility and integrity and kindness together can help you lead transformational change. The other things that transformational leaders tend to do is that they express clearly and frequently their vision of the future, and they exude a passion for doing the right thing. And so, you know, if you're an introvert, this might seem a little out of reach, but in fact, regardless of whether you're comfortable in big groups or not, you can practice and learn how to display passion and talk about the future you want. So when people trust you and they want to be like you, or they want to be affiliated with you, and you have a vision, together, those things can move groups of people. Some other things that transformational leaders do is they boost other people's self-efficacy. Christy was talking about how people don't necessarily feel like what they do matters. So when, or that they are able to do what needs to be done. And so as a transformational leader, you can connect people to the resources that give them a sense of efficacy, and you can also be kind of a cheerleader for them, saying, yes, you're going to be able to do this. We all are going to have to be able to do this. And then finally, encourage critical thinking in other people. So transformational leaders don't tell other people what to do. They help other people figure out for themselves how to change their work and how to change their behavior. So one thing that is in short supply is transformational leaders who also have an ecologically consistent worldview. And so the challenge for us is to get folks like you in the AGU who most likely have an ecologically grounded worldview to become transformational leaders. And we need to get people who are already transformational leaders to develop a more ecologically grounded worldview. Luckily, both transformational leaderships and worldviews are learnable. So this is an area where we can really succeed if we put these two aspects of people together. So for the last part of today's talk, we are going to leave you with some final thoughts about staying sane in an insane world, as they might say. So Christy, I'm going to stop sharing here.
Okay, I will take over and again narrate. I was just answering the question in the chat, so I'll get back to that in a second. Here we go. Oh shoot, I didn't advance my slides, so I'm going to do that right now. Okay, so part 4. I'm just going to spend a minute or two talking about the importance of us as scientists who are facing climate change and really looking at the data and understanding the reality. It's important that we are taking care of ourselves in order to be more effective in our work on this issue. So 4 quick points about fostering your own personal resilience so that you can be effective in changing our society with respect to climate change. First of all, get out there and enjoy nature. Those who are more connected to nature benefit greatly and are also more likely to take action in order to protect nature. So really revel in your connection. Of course, it is also true that those who are more connected are also feeling more pain at the loss of and damage to natural systems. But get out there and connect to nature. Second, find your people. We need social support. We need other people to tell us, no, you're not crazy. This is a crisis. Yeah, I'll go with you to that protest. Find some joy and pleasure with others in taking action. Push the envelope on the action you're taking. We all need to be taking more action, more out there action. The more pushing the envelope action that individuals take, the more normal other types of actions start to appear. So we are social creatures. We need to see something several times to recognize it as a trend or as something that is socially acceptable. Once we start seeing it as socially acceptable, protest action, for example, which most people don't think is normal, once we start seeing it more often, we do start to see it as, oh yeah, this is okay. Maybe I can do that. And we need a lot more of it out there in the world. So find your people and have fun with them and encourage them and have them encourage you to do more. Manage your mind. My students here at my college rely on fuzzy animal, cute animal videos to calm themselves down. So practicing mindful coping, that's not, that's part of it, but really the best mindful coping, it turns out, is finding meaning in what you're doing to address the problem. So find meaning, but also take care of yourself and watch fuzzy cat videos when you need to. And then, as I already said, we need to be out there taking collective action. And lots of research shows that engaging in collective action is actually good for our mental health. And recent research on climate anxiety and activism shows that engaging in some form of climate activism provides a little bit of a buffer for the extreme forms of climate anxiety. People feel a little bit of, are less likely to feel the extreme forms of climate anxiety if they're out there taking activist actions. So that's what we have to share with you all today. And thank you so much for being here. And we can take questions now.
Thank you, Elise, Christy, and Denise. You can unmute yourself if you want to ask a question, or you can leave it in the chat. We already have one question in the chat, and Christy, you mentioned that you were responding to that, so I'm going to take care of that.
Yes, sure. So the question, first, thanks, Max and Matt, for the question and the resource. So Elise and I are not personally working on this, the synthesis research on COVID impacts and climate change impacts, but I have been reading it and am intrigued and interested in it. And yes, indeed, there are similarities, but there are also, it seems that COVID exacerbated that people, young people especially, were coming into that pandemic with higher levels of general worry and concern. And so more worry on top of more worry means more worry. So there are definitely these, they're exacerbating each other. And it's intriguing to see what is happening now in the possible aftermath. Are we really in the aftermath of the pandemic? There's still this, I know 3 people who had COVID last week. So there's still lingering worry, although it does seem to be mostly behind us. So how are people responding now? The anxiety hasn't necessarily gone away. Dennis, you might have more to add on that.
Yeah, in addition to COVID, we could also look to a lot of other historical events. And so there's a good deal of research about following severe weather events, and even some of them that occurred many years ago, and building resilience following those events. And that research provides a pretty good base for us to be looking at and thinking about and to start expanding on as we anticipate more and more, unfortunately, of those severe weather events coming our way.
Susan, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you for an excellent presentation. My questions may be a little bit self-serving because I just started teaching my class, as I do every year, on climate change and air pollution, and was just struck this year by the students' reactions. We're in week 2, and I always start with the, you know, how climate change is affecting health. And I'm just looking at these students and just seeing, you know, their faces just full of dejection. This is just such a doom and gloom situation. I'm just, you know, when you approach teaching with your students, how do you address this?
Well, you always have to you always have to make sure that they have some hope. And I even think the series of 4 slides at the end of this presentation are sort of a good template. You could just take those and put them into one of your class presentations to say, you know, the way is to you know, get over or to tampen down these feelings of anxiety is to take action. And these are ways to do it in a healthy way.
I love the book and the framing that the book uses, All We Can Save, by Catherine Wilkinson and Ayanna Elizabeth Johnson. And it's written by women and non-binary, two-spirited people, and there are many, it's divided into sections and then many authors within each section. And the whole premise of it is, indeed, we are facing a lot with respect to climate change. And that's just one of many issues threatening humanity. And things look pretty bleak, but there is still so much we can do and so much we can save, and emphasizing that every degree matters. Every every 1/10 of a degree matters in terms of the amount of suffering that results on later, and now. So emphasizing that, yes, it looks bad, but there is still much we can do, and it makes a difference. But not to play down the reality that this situation is serious.
Any other question? If not, I have 2 questions in that was asked previously. So I wanted to know about your opinions about how can we build closer relationships between geoscientists and medical public health professionals, in this case, psychologists, for example.
I think something like this is a great place to start, building these bridges between organizations, and having these kinds of conversations. Maybe next time we should have the geophysical scientists present alongside and even in conversation with each other. I mean, I'm like the carpenter with the hammer. Everything becomes a nail. So I see everything through the psychological lens. And I think we just need to make those things normal so that scientists of all kinds see having these kinds of conversations with other kinds of scientists as, oh, this is just the way we do things.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think both informal and formal groups that bring together scientists from different disciplines to exchange information, and sometimes it may be really casual information, just talking about the issues, which can spark ideas and cause everybody to recognize, hey, we're thinking about some of the same things. And then, going to one another's conferences, these kinds of things are going to have a tremendous impact over the long term.
I want to just give the thumbs up to the idea of going to each other's conferences. Having sessions where you've got interdisciplinary panels really does several things. It creates connections where maybe there haven't been in the past, but it also creates community out of very disparate disciplines. And the more normalized, like Christy was saying, that becomes the more we can learn from each other, and I know that there, at least historically, has been sort of a divide between natural sciences and social sciences. And so the more that social scientists have an opportunity to describe the kind of work we do and how rigorous it is from an empirical standpoint, and that kind of thing can help elevate its value in the eyes of other natural scientists.
Thank you so much for your insights.
There's
Go
a
ahead.
question in the chat that Elise has to answer before we run out of time. Do you advise or speak to Fortune 500 business CEOs or Wall Street executives about how their org cultures need to shift to an ecologically grounded worldview?
Excellent question. I don't directly, but Christy and I do a lot of translational work that we're trying to put in front of folks in business. And we're in academia, and so this is an area we have worked very hard in for the last 15 years to get both our institutions where we work, but also more broadly higher education, to understand how to change their cultures, or at least leverage their cultures to inspire more sustainable or even regenerative work.
And we're hard at work, especially Elise, on a book right now that is about specific for academia, but with lessons more broadly for all organizations about how to use exactly what Elise was talking about to transform organizations.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much for letting us know about that. Well, thank you so much. We are at the top of the hour. I really appreciate our speakers and whoever joined us today for this great presentation. And I hope you will have a great weekend. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Azar.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. This was fun.
Thank you so much.